The day you understand that your own child is ashamed of you doesn't announce itself with a slammed door or a shouting match. It arrives quietly, the way cold air slips under a window you forgot to seal. You're sitting at a table full of food you didn't cook, in a house you'll never be invited back to, and your son looks right at you like you're furniture he's embarrassed to own. I gave 41 years of my life to the electrical trade in Columbus, Ohio. My hands tell that story better than I ever could. The index finger on my left hand bends slightly wrong from a conduit accident in 1987. The calluses on my palms never fully softened, even after I retired. I wasn't the kind of man who talked about money at parties or measured my worth in square footage. I was the kind of man who showed up before sunrise and left after the job was done right. That's all I ever knew how to be. If you've ever worked your whole life in silence and watched someone take that silence for weakness, I want you to hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a like on this video and tell me in the comments where you're listening from today. These stories are for you, and getting them out to people who need them matters more than you know. When my wife Donna passed away 3 years ago after a long battle with her heart, she held my hand in that hospital room and asked me one thing. She said, "Raymond, don't let Danny struggle the way we did starting out." Donna grew up in a trailer park outside Dayton. I grew up sharing a bedroom with 2 brothers in a house where the heat was a luxury. So her words weren't just a request. They were a debt I intended to honor with everything I had left. My son Daniel Danny married a woman named Brianna 2.5 years ago. Brianna came from a different world than ours. Her father, a man named Cord Whitfield, ran what he called a wealth management and lifestyle consulting firm out of a glass-walled office in the Short North neighborhood. I'll tell you exactly what that means in plain language. Cord sold expensive advice to people with more money than sense, drove a leased Mercedes that probably cost more per month than my first mortgage, and had a handshake that lasted 2 seconds too long. He was the kind of man who uses the word portfolio in casual conversation and expects it to land like thunder. Danny was a project coordinator at a mid-sized logistics company, pulling in about $72,000 a year. He was good at his job, organized, reliable traits he got from me, though he'd stopped acknowledging that. Brianna worked part-time in marketing, maybe $30,000 a year on a good year. Together, they were doing all right by any honest measure. The trouble started when they decided all right wasn't enough. They found a townhouse in a newer development in Dublin, a suburb west of Columbus where the streets are lined with identical mailboxes and everyone has a Ring doorbell and a lease on something German. The place was beautiful, I won't deny it. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, an open-plan kitchen with quartz countertops. The monthly cost, once you factored in the mortgage, HOA dues, and the 2 car payments they were carrying, was sitting at just under $4,000. Danny's take-home, after taxes and his 401k contribution, cleared maybe $4,300. On paper, they were surviving. In reality, they were standing on a ledge. I didn't tell him that. I did what Donna asked. I called my old accountant, a man named Bernie Schiff who I'd trusted for 20 years, and I asked him to set up 2 separate automatic payments on my behalf. $1,400 a month went quietly to the mortgage servicer on the Dublin property. Another $600 went to cover what turned out to be a chronic shortfall in their joint checking account, the kind of gap that shows up every month when the credit card bill arrives and there's not quite enough runway. $2,000 a month, drawn from my retirement savings. No announcement, no conditions. Danny knew I helped out here and there. He had no earthly idea I was the reason the lights stayed on. I told myself I was being a good father. I told myself Donna would have approved. Looking back now, I was building a comfortable lie, and I handed Danny all the materials to build it right along with me. I own that. I want to say that plainly right here because it matters. A father who protects his son from every financial consequence isn't raising a man. He's raising a passenger. Now let me tell you about the Saturday in September that changed everything. Cord Whitfield hosted what he called a family celebration lunch. At his home in Upper Arlington, a 6-bedroom house with a 3-car garage and a landscaped backyard that looked like it was maintained by a team of people who'd never met a weed. The occasion was technically Brianna's birthday, But what it really was, I learned quickly, was a stage for Cord to perform on. He'd invited a handful of his business associates, a few neighbors who clearly orbited his social world, and our family, which meant me, sitting at a long outdoor table in my good button-down shirt, the one Donna bought me for Christmas the year before she got sick. The food was catered. Cord walked table to table like a senator running for re-election. His wife, Marlene, floated at his elbow, looking polished and slightly exhausted. And Danny, my son, was transformed. I watched it happen, the way you watch weather roll in. His posture changed. His voice dropped half an octave. He started prefacing sentences with, "Cord was telling me, and Cord's philosophy on this is." I let it go. Parents let a lot go. That's the job. But then came the moment. We were between courses, and Cord had settled into the chair at the head of the table like a man who had practiced sitting that way. He had a glass of bourbon in his hand, not wine, bourbon, because Cord was the kind of man who made a point of ordering something that required explanation. He started talking about the economy, about inflation, about how the working class had been sold a lie about job security and pensions. "The men who built this country's middle class," Cord said, sweeping his glass in a gesture that somehow included me. "They did what they were told. Show up, punch in, punch out, collect the watch at 65. Nobody taught them that real wealth is built through ownership, through leverage, through having your money work for you while you sleep." He smiled at the table. "No offense to honest labor. I just think the model is broken." I kept my eyes on my plate. I'd heard this speech 100 different ways from 100 different men in nicer clothes than me. I was ready to let it pass. Then Danny spoke. He was looking right at me, and I want you to understand what that look contained. It wasn't anger. It wasn't cruelty exactly. It was something that cut deeper than both of those. It was dismissal, like I was a math problem he'd already solved and set aside. "Dad's generation just didn't think big enough," Danny said, with that easy smile of a man who believes he's being charming. "Cord built real equity. He created something. No offense, Dad, but spending 40 years pulling wire for someone else's building, that's just not the same thing?" He shrugged. Brianna nodded. A couple of Cord's associates chuckled politely. Cord raised his glass slightly, in a gesture that managed to be both modest and triumphant. "I want to tell you what 40 years of electrical work actually looks like. It looks like getting up at 4:30 in February to drive to a job site where the concrete hasn't cured and the wind is coming off Lake Erie and your fingers go numb inside your gloves before 8 o'clock. It looks like working overtime every Christmas for 12 years so your son could have the bicycle and the winter coat and the private soccer lessons. It looks like standing over your wife's hospital bed, knowing that every bill arriving in the mailbox is covered because you never once spent more than you earned, and you never once borrowed a dollar you weren't certain you could return. That's what 40 years of pulling wire for someone else looks like." I did not say any of that. I set my fork down on the edge of my plate. I picked up my water glass, took one slow sip, and placed it back down with the kind of precision that comes from a lifetime of being careful with things that matter. "You might be right, Danny," I said quietly. "Maybe Cord can cover your expenses going forward." The table didn't go silent all at once. It sort of drained, like water pulling back before a wave. Danny's smile stayed on his face for about 2 seconds longer than it should have, the way a light flickers before it goes out. "What does that mean?" he said, his voice shifting. "It means what it means," I said. I smiled at Cord. I thanked Marlene for the lovely afternoon, and I drove home to my house on Wellesley Avenue, where I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and called Bernie Schiff first thing Monday morning. "Bernie," I said, "the 2 automated payments going to Danny's accounts, the mortgage servicer and the checking account transfer. I need them both stopped. This month's cycle, if possible." Bernie was quiet for a moment. "Raymond, if the mortgage payment doesn't post on the 1st, they'll get a late notice within 15 days. And the checking account." "I know what'll happen," I said. "He needs to know too." Bernie canceled both transfers by Tuesday. 3 weeks of silence followed. Danny didn't call, not once. I knew what was happening in his mind. He was certain I was making a point, doing a bit, and that the money would quietly reappear the way it always had. He was living in a version of reality where the floor had always held and always would. The floor held for 26 days. I was raking leaves in the backyard on a Saturday afternoon in mid-October when my neighbor Carol called out from her yard to tell me I had someone at my front door. I came around the side of the house and found Danny standing on my porch. He wasn't wearing a jacket over his shirt, which told me he'd left in a hurry. His face had the particular look of a man who has been awake too many nights running numbers in his head and coming up short every time. I opened the screen door. "Come in." He came in. He didn't sit down right away. He stood in the entryway with his hands in his pockets and looked at the floor, and I could see him working up to something the way he used to as a teenager when he'd broken something and wasn't sure how to tell me. "The mortgage company sent a notice," he said finally. 30-day past due. There's a late fee on top of it. And the checking account, Dad. We overdrafted twice last week. Brianna doesn't know why everything is suddenly—" He stopped. He looked at me. "Wait." He said it the way a man says it when a room he thought was solid starts to tilt. "You've been paying the mortgage?" he said. Not loud, just hollow. "For 2 years and 4 months?" I said. $1,400 on the first of every month, straight to the servicer, plus a $600 transfer to your joint checking account to keep it from running dry. He stood there with his mouth slightly open. I watched him do the math. $2,000 a month, times 28 months, the number settling on him like a weight. He pulled out the back of the nearest chair and sat down without being invited. He looked like the air had been let out of him. "Dad," he said, "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "That was my choice. But I'm not making that choice anymore." He looked up. "What does that mean?" "We can't cover the mortgage on what we make. We can't. Brianna's hours got cut this fall, and I've been waiting on a raise that—" "Danny." My voice wasn't hard. "I want to be clear about that. I wasn't enjoying this. Do you know what your monthly fixed costs are? Total. Mortgage, HOA, both car payments, insurance, the gym membership, the streaming services, all of it. Do you know the number?" He didn't answer immediately. That pause told me everything I needed to know. "That's the problem," I said, and I said it gently. "You've been living in a house where the foundation was laid by someone else, and you never looked down to see it. I let that happen. That's on me as much as it is on you, and I want you to hear me say that plainly. If you're still with me on this one, I want you to take a quick second to hit that like button and subscribe. Every week I share stories like this one. Stories about real love, hard lessons, and what it actually means to be a father. It means the world to have you here." He sat across from me, and I could see him shifting toward the thing he'd come here to ask. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and his voice got quieter and more careful the way voices do when they're about to ask for something large. "Dad, I know things got out of hand. I know what I said at Cord's lunch was wrong, and I'm sorry. I really am. But if you could just cover the back payment and keep the transfer going for a few more months, just until I get stabilized, I'll pay you back. I'll put it in writing." I looked at my son for a long moment. I thought about Donna. I thought about what she actually meant when she said she didn't want him to struggle. I don't think she meant she wanted him to never struggle. I think she meant she didn't want him to be alone when it was hard. Those are two entirely different things, and I had spent 2 years confusing them. "Danny," I said, "I'm not going to pay your mortgage, not the back amount, and not going forward." The color in his face shifted. "Dad, let me finish." I folded my hands on the table. "I'm not doing it because I'm punishing you for what you said about me at Cord's house. I'm not doing it because I'm angry. I'm doing it because writing that check would be the cruelest thing I could do to you right now, and I've already been too cruel to you in that particular way for over 2 years. He started to speak. "You said Cord built something real," I continued. "And you're right that I want you to build something real too. But you can't build anything real on a foundation someone else is pouring in secret. That's not a foundation. That's a stage set. And eventually, every stage set falls down." Danny looked at the table. He didn't say anything. I could see him deciding whether to be angry or whether to actually listen, and I gave him the time to make that decision without rushing him toward it. "So what am I supposed to do?" he said finally. The anger had mostly left his voice. What replaced it was something more honest, something closer to fear. I got up, went to the junk drawer by the refrigerator, pulled out a legal pad and a pen, and set them on the table between us. First thing Monday, I want you to call your mortgage servicer and explain the situation. They have hardship deferral options. It's not guaranteed, but it exists, and the bank would rather work with you than foreclose. Second, you need to sit down with Brianna tonight, Danny, not tomorrow, and go through every single monthly cost. Write them all down, every one. Then put your combined take-home income next to it, and look at the difference with your eyes open. He was watching me carefully now. The Dublin townhouse, I said. I want you to think hard about whether it's the right size house for the right season of your life. There's no shame in downsizing. There is a lot of shame in losing a home because you were too proud to make a smart decision before the bank made it for you. Danny looked at the legal pad. He picked up the pen without me asking him to. He wrote something down, I couldn't see what, and then he set the pen back on the table and looked up at me. I went to Cord, he said quietly. After I got the bank notice, I called him. I thought. He stopped and shook his head. He told me it wasn't a good time, that he was dealing with some restructuring in his business. He said, and I'm not making this up, he said, I hope you find a solution, buddy. That's all. I hope you find a solution. I didn't say I told you so. That's not what the moment needed. What I already knew, because a longtime friend of mine named Stu Barker worked in commercial real estate lending downtown, was that Cord Whitfield's lifestyle consulting firm had been bleeding money for 18 months. 2 of his major clients had walked. His office lease in the short north was 3 months behind. The Mercedes, as I suspected, was a 60-month lease with a balloon payment coming due that Cord was not going to be able to meet. The man who had implied at a birthday lunch that people like me lacked vision was quietly selling off his investment accounts to keep his checking account positive. Cord is not what he presented himself to be, I said simply. But that's his story to reckon with, not yours. Yours is the only one you can do anything about. Danny sat in my kitchen for another hour that afternoon. We went through the legal pad together. We listed his income, Brianna's income, every fixed cost, every variable expense. The number at the bottom of the page, the real number, what they owed versus what they made, was uncomfortable, but it was survivable. They were not underwater beyond recovery. They had options. They just hadn't been forced to look at them until now. I told him I would help him move if it came to that. I told him I would show him how to write a hardship letter to the bank, because I'd written one myself in 1993 when a job got delayed and I was 3 weeks short on my own mortgage. I told him that if they decided the smart move was to rent their place out and find a smaller apartment while they rebuilt their savings, I would help them pack. What I would not do was reach into my retirement account and paper over the gap so he could keep a lifestyle he hadn't built and couldn't sustain. That's not cruelty. That's the most respectful thing one person can do for another. The weeks that followed were not easy. I won't pretend otherwise. Danny and Brianna had several hard conversations that I was not a part of and would not have wanted to be. They contacted the mortgage servicer and were approved for a 60-day payment deferral while they got their finances in order. They sold one of the cars, Brianna's, the newer one, the one they'd been leasing, and replaced it with a used Civic she paid for in cash from the equity. They found a financial counselor through their credit union, a young woman named Priya, who Danny said was the first person who ever made a budget feel manageable rather than shameful. They didn't lose the house, but something more important happened, and it happened quietly, the way the best things do. On a Sunday in early December, Danny called and asked if he could come by. He showed up at noon carrying a thermos of coffee and a small tin of the shortbread cookies that Donna used to make every Christmas, which Brianna had apparently spent 2 evenings in the kitchen trying to recreate from memory and a printed recipe card. We sat at my kitchen table. He poured the coffee into 2 mugs I'd had since before he was born. He was wearing an old sweatshirt. His hands were a little roughed up. He'd spent the previous weekend helping a neighbor reshingle a section of roof for cash, the first physical labor I'd seen him do voluntarily in years. "I want to say something," he said, looking into his mug, "and I want to say it right. I waited. What I said at that lunch about your work not being real, that was wrong in a way that goes deeper than just being rude. It was wrong because it wasn't true, and I knew it wasn't true even when I was saying it. I said it because Cord was sitting there, and I wanted to sound like I belonged in his orbit. And the guy I threw under the bus to get there was the one person who never once asked me for anything in return for any of it. He looked up. "I'm sorry, Dad. Not because the money stopped, because I said it." I picked up my mug. I looked out the window at the December light coming flat and gray across the backyard where he used to play when he was 7. "You don't owe me an apology anymore," I said. "You made some hard decisions this fall without anyone holding your hand. That's the only apology I needed." He nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, which he slid across the table. "It was a simple handwritten repayment schedule, not for all of it," he said, "but for what he could reasonably do. $50 a month, starting in January." I looked at it. I pushed it back to his side of the table. "Put that $50 in a savings account," I said. "Every month. Don't touch it for 2 years. Then tell me what number you're looking at." He stared at the paper for a moment. Then he folded it back up, put it in his pocket, and he almost smiled. Not the performed smile from Cord's patio, but the real one, the lopsided one he's had since he was a kid. By the following spring, I'd heard through a mutual contact that Cord Whitfield had closed his short north office and let his staff go. His Mercedes was gone. He and Marlene had quietly listed their Upper Arlington home, and from what I understood, the sale barely cleared what was owed on it. The man who had raised a glass to the working class's lack of vision was renting a 2-bedroom condominium in Worthington and rebuilding something much smaller and, I suspect, much more honest. I don't take satisfaction in that the way some people might expect. What I take satisfaction in is simpler. On Sunday mornings now, fairly regularly, Danny drives over to Wellesley Avenue, not to borrow anything, not to ask for anything. He comes because somewhere in the past year, he discovered that his father, the man who spent 4 decades pulling wire in other people's buildings, is actually someone worth sitting with. We drink coffee. He asks questions about the trade, about the early years, about how Donna and I managed when we had nothing but 2 jobs between us and a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side. He asks the way a man asks when he's genuinely trying to learn something, not the way a man asks to be polite. Last Sunday, he helped me replace a ceiling fan in the spare bedroom. He watched carefully, asked good questions, and didn't pretend to know the steps before I showed them to him. At the end, he stood back and looked at the finished job and said, quietly, "I didn't know you could do that." I almost laughed. "Son, I've been doing that since before you were born." Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do for someone you love is not save them. Sometimes it's standing at the edge of the water and saying, clearly and calmly, "I know you can swim. Now prove it to yourself." Real love is not always the soft thing. Sometimes it's the truest, most difficult thing, setting down the checkbook and picking up a legal pad instead. A man who builds quietly still builds. The noise around him was never the measure. If that hit something in you, if you've ever had to draw a hard line with someone you love, or if you're the person who needed someone to draw that line with you, drop a comment below and share your story. I read every one. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like before you go. Take care of yourselves, and remember, a real foundation is poured $1 honest at a time.